What if Avengers was cast in the 90s?
Nick Fury.
Morgan Freeman.
No. Sam Jackson would still be Nick Fury.
No, Denzel would be Nick Fury, and Uma Thurman would be Black Widow.
Well, then who would Sam Jackson be?
We are talking Super Hot. This one is directed and written by Taylor King and stars Kandace Kale as Jackie, who is our main character. Now, this movie feels to me like it's heavily influenced by the works of Kevin Smith, or more specifically, his early movies such as Clerks. And it's almost like, what if Kevin Smith had directed a low-budget vampire horror comedy rather than Clerks? This maybe is what it would have looked like. And so it focuses on this kind of trio of friends. The main character, Jackie, is this kind of pizza delivery girl, although she leaves that job very early in the movie, and the company's called Super Hot. Seems like an odd choice to call this movie that, because I bet you if you Google Super Hot, this movie ain't going to be top of the list. And she's got these two kind of like geeky friends, and they just talk pop culture and play video games and etc. But Jackie's got a crush on this girl that lives across the road called Carmen. Now, Carmen's got a boyfriend called Brad, but you feel that there may be something a little bit kind of unspoken going on between them. But Carmen has decided to move into this kind of sorority house, and to kind of like keep tabs on her, Jackie decides that she's going to deliver a pizza to this place, only to discover that this house is actually full of vampires, and they have nefarious plans. She gathers her kind of friends, and they even get a descendant of Van Helsing to help them in the quest against these vampires. What'll happen? Well, you'll have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss, first of all, what works with Super Hot. Certainly not the title. Okay, so you know where I'm going when I start saying stuff like this. The movie is quite well shot. It's obviously very low budget. At times this movie feels like it's just a bunch of friends making a movie. But I've got to say, in regards to sort of the actual camera work and things like this and editing, I've got to say I think it actually looks fairly proficiently made. It's surprising because a lot of the other aspects of this film feel very, very amateurish. But I will say, just the kind of things like the technical side of stuff is actually done to a reasonable standard. King, who directed this movie, has actually produced a few movies and directed some, so this isn't his first rodeo. And I think it shows, even though there are some very, very amateur kind of issues with this movie, it still feels like there's, on the technical side at least, there's somewhat of an assured hand in the kind of like the making of the technical side of stuff. So it's proficiently shot, at least. The editing's fine, sound design is all fine, so the lighting's fine, so on a technical level, it's proficiently made, to a low budget standard at least. You know, those of you who enjoy kind of geek culture and enjoy the films of Kevin Smith, you know, may be amused by the kind of the incidental kind of conversation that our characters have, talking about, you know, what if the Avengers was made in the 90s and who would they cast, stuff like that. It does seem like it's trying to ape that kind of that Kevin Smith vibe, you know, talking about kind of pop culture, nothing directly kind of to do with the actual film itself, just to establish these people are actually into these kind of things. And, you know, we see that they're a collection of toys and they're going into comic shops and things like this. So the movie works very hard to try and establish these trio of characters as kind of, you know, geeks and stuff like that. And I have to say, I think, you know, you do get the impression that these guys are like that. And I think that they sold that reasonably well. And the movie does have a few comedic elements. Kale, who plays Jackie, you know, is this kind of like somewhat kind of sullen kind of rock chick who never really gets too excited and things like this. So I kind of liked her kind of Daria approach to the sort of character, never really kind of getting too worked up or excited about anything. So it makes it kind of a sort of a fun character to a certain degree. And my favourite character was that of Brad, who is actually one of the more minor characters in the movie. He's actually the boyfriend of Carmen, who is the kind of the item of affection, so to speak, the person of affection. But they could have made this Brad character seem like the typical kind of douchey boyfriend that Jackie is in competition with. But in actual fact, they make him quite a likeable guy. And very affable. And that there's his actual journey and how he kind of, like, what happens to him, I think was the most interesting thing in the movie. But I've got to be honest with you, this film is not going to be for everyone. It is extremely amateurish, as I've said. So technical levels aside and stuff, the movie just feels like it's just a bunch of friends slapping together a movie with the kind of the barest minimum of scripts. Those of you who are wanting to see horror, this is the kind of one of the weakest depictions of vampires that I've seen on screen. There's one gore shot, which was done to a reasonable extent, I'll give it that. But the vampires seem so unlike vampires, really, to be quite honest. I mean, there's a funny joke about how they're models, and that's why they want their eternal youth. But it seems in the context of this movie that they're not immortal, so they need to perform some sacrifice to be immortal, but they're already vampires. So the lore here is very kind of wishy-washy. We see them walking around in daylight. They seem to be able to be killed with by any standard guns and kind of like crowbars and things like this. So their actual kind of supernatural elements of these vampires, if you want to call them that, because they're really vampires in name only. We don't even kind of really see them drink blood. We see them drinking wine and things like this. And you know, there's a couple of instances where we see the kind of the cheesy fangs and the actors just going and stuff like that. It's very kind of typical cheesy, low budget vampire movies. Of course, you know, everyone feels the need to kind of peel back their lips to show the fangs because, you know, the production's paid for fangs, so we have to see them, even though it looks very unnatural and like they're kind of showing the fangs rather than it being a natural you know, snarl or anything like that. Yeah, so the actual vampire stuff is really weak, to be honest. And we don't really know anything about our vampire characters. We see a little bit of a prologue at the beginning. But it's just very, very weakly done. The context of the setup with these vampires, if you can call them that. Vampires light. Some of the acting here as well is very amateurish, to be honest. It kind of suits in a way the early works of Kevin Smith, Clerks, that sort of style of guerrilla filmmaking. But I don't know if you can get away with it as much these days, to be honest. I just don't think that indie kind of feel to it just quite gels, and the characters seem particularly kind of unrealistic in the way they're kind of acted and also written. Now, obviously, this is a horror comedy, which is meant to be a little bit not taken particularly seriously, but it's not spoofed, so we're kind of meant to believe these things are happening to the characters. I'll draw a comparison to another kind of modern vampire movie, Vampires, or Bronx versus the Vampires, Vampires versus the Bronx, whatever way around it is. Again, that kind of like, it was a modern vampire comedy, but you still felt the dramatic elements and the kind of the horror elements were relevant within the movie. This one, there isn't that. And to be honest with you, the plot is so light. You know, it's halfway through the film before our characters even realise that there's kind of actually vampires, and and the whole rest of the movie is like, we got to go and rescue, you know, the people that are in there, and that's kind of it. There's no real actual depth of any type of plot here. It's the most kind of like sparse of narratives, to be honest. So I think people who may like Kevin Smith, the early movies of Kevin Smith, but this is not as kind of clever or iconic as that by any means. And I feel like this more seems like a copy of Kevin Smith's stuff rather than kind of anything that kind of really builds on top of that. It just feels like they're kind of somewhat ripping off sort of the Kevin Smith style movies. Not that they were a massive kind of like, you know, huge audience or anything like that, but those who like it, I mean, even Kevin Smith can't replicate that success he had back in the early days now. So ultimately this movie had a smattering of reasonable elements, but as a film itself, the narrative was quite dull. the production was amateurish, and the lore was really underdeveloped. So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.